kept my face still. That was the only thing I could control that morning, my face. My daughter was getting married in 4 hours, and I was standing in the hallway of the Fairmont-le-Château Frontenac with a garment bag over one arm and a clutch purse that kept slipping, and every time someone congratulated me, I smiled and said thank you and meant absolutely none of it. I want to be honest about that. I had been awake since 3 in the morning, not from excitement. From the feeling that had been sitting in my chest for the better part of 6 months, the feeling I kept trying to name and kept talking myself out of. You tell yourself you're being protective. You tell yourself it's just a mother's nerves. You tell yourself your daughter is 34 years old and a grown woman, and she has chosen this person, and that is the end of it. I told myself all of that, right up until I walked into the wrong corridor on the 9th floor of that hotel, and then I stopped telling myself anything at all. But I should start earlier than that. You need to understand what was there before, or none of what came after makes any sense. My daughter's name is Ingrid. She's the kind of person who still mails birthday cards, not texts, not Facebook messages. Actual cards in envelopes with stamps. She drives 40 minutes to visit her old high school teacher when the woman has surgery. She remembers the names of people's dogs. She is, and I say this without the soft fog of maternal bias, genuinely one of the most considerate people I have ever known. I raised her alone, mostly. Her father and I separated when she was 11, and it was not one of those clean, cordial divorces that people describe at dinner parties. It was long and expensive, and it left marks on both of us. We recovered. Ingrid recovered better than I did, which tells you something about her. I have a small property management company in Ottawa. Nothing dramatic. Residential buildings, mostly a handful of properties in the Glebe, a few in Westboro, one larger building in Centretown that's been both my greatest headache and my most reliable income for 15 years. I also have what my accountant calls a reasonably diversified investment portfolio, which is his way of saying that I've been careful and lucky and that I paid attention during the years when other people were not paying attention. I am not wealthy in the way people mean when they say the word wealthy and raise an eyebrow. I am comfortable in the way that only becomes visible when something goes wrong and you don't have to panic. Ingrid has never been interested in any of it. That's the truth. She's a physiotherapist. She rents a condo in Hintonburg and she rides her bike to work until November, and she genuinely does not understand why anyone needs more than one good coat. I used to tease her about it. She would roll her eyes. She met my son-in-law. I will not call him that anymore, but for the sake of the story I will call him what he was at the time. She met him at a fundraiser for the Ottawa Humane Society of all places. His name was Derek. He had kind eyes and good manners, and he laughed easily, and he asked her thoughtful questions about her work, and he followed up. I liked him at first. I want to be clear about that too, because it matters. I was not the suspicious mother who scrutinized him from day one. I invited him to Thanksgiving. I asked about his family. I made a genuine effort. His mother, Paulette, came into the picture about 5 months in. She lived in Mississauga and drove up for a long weekend, and we had dinner at a restaurant in the market, and she was charming. Very charming. The kind of charming that is slightly too consistent, where no rough edges ever appear, where every sentence lands perfectly. I noticed it the way you notice a smell you can't quite place. Not unpleasant, but there. After that dinner, something changed, though I couldn't have told you what. Derek started asking Ingrid questions about my company. Casual questions. How does property management work exactly? Do you own the buildings outright, or is it mortgaged? What happens to the portfolio when you retire? Ingrid didn't think anything of it, because Ingrid doesn't think that way about money. She told him whatever he asked. She thought he was curious. I started to think differently. I said nothing to Ingrid. I know how that sounds. I've had time to question it, but I had no evidence, only instinct, and instinct that says your daughter's boyfriend might be calculating your net worth is an instinct you keep quiet about unless you want to ruin your relationship with your daughter on the basis of nothing. So I watched, and I said nothing, and the engagement happened, and it was beautiful, and Ingrid cried, and I hugged her, and I thought, maybe I am wrong. Maybe this is just a man who asks a lot of questions. Maybe I am still carrying something from my own divorce that has nothing to do with this. The wedding was planned for October at the Fairmont in Quebec City. Ingrid had always loved that building. We had gone there together when she was small, just the two of us, and she had pressed her face to the glass of the lobby and said it looked like a castle. It did look like a castle. I booked the venue because I wanted her to have the wedding she had imagined when she was 7 years old. I was paying for it. That's relevant. Not because I wanted credit, but because Paulette had made several suggestions about the budget in the months leading up. The florist she preferred, the photographer she'd heard was the best, and each suggestion came attached to a price that was significantly higher than what I'd already arranged. I found excuses not to take the suggestions. Paulette was gracious about it each time, but I noticed that she kept a careful mental record. The morning of the wedding, I arrived at the hotel at 7:30. I had slept badly, which is normal for me in hotels. I'd had coffee in my room, and then come downstairs with the dress and the things Ingrid had asked me to bring. Her grandmother's brooch, a particular lip liner she couldn't find in her bag, the card from her father who had decided not to attend and sent something written on paper instead. The bridal suite was on the 8th floor. I came out of the elevator on the 9th by mistake. Older hotels, old elevators, I pressed 8 and it took me to 9, or I pressed 9 without thinking. I've gone back and forth on which it was, and I suppose it doesn't matter. The 9th floor corridor was quiet. There was a room set aside for the groom's party, and I knew that because the wedding coordinator had mentioned it in passing, the way she mentioned many logistical things while I tried to keep track of them. The door was not fully closed. I was going to walk past it. And then I heard Derek's voice, and I slowed down without deciding to. He was laughing. That easy laugh I had catalogued as charming. He said something I didn't catch, and then Paulette said, clearly in the satisfied tone of someone who'd been waiting a long time to say it, "She has no idea, does she?" I stopped. Not a question. It wasn't phrased as a question. She said it the way you say something you've been thinking for months, not to get information but to savor it. Derek said, "She thinks I hung the moon." He laughed again. I put one hand on the wall beside me. I don't know why. I think I needed to make sure the wall was there. Paulette said, "Her mother's the one we have to think about. You know what the property alone is worth in today's market." A pause. "She's not going to hand it over easily." Derek, "She won't have to hand it over. That's the whole point. Once we're married, once Ingrid's listed, once there's a joint, it's already done." Paulette, quieter now, and Ingrid doesn't know anything about the financials. Derek, "Ingrid thinks money is crass. It's the most convenient thing about her." I stood in that hallway for what felt like a very long time. I want to be honest again. I did not cry. I thought I might, but I did not. What I felt instead was something colder and more specific. The shape of every small doubt I had filed away over the past year suddenly had a label on it, and the label was not a surprise. It was a confirmation. I walked back to the elevator. I went down to the lobby. I sat in one of the chairs near the window that faces the courtyard, and I watched the fountains for a few minutes, and I thought about what to do. Here's what I want to explain, because it's the part people don't always understand. I was not hysterical. I did not want revenge in the dramatic, spectacular sense. What I wanted was very simple. I wanted my daughter not to walk into a marriage with someone who had just called her most loving quality, her lack of interest in money, the most convenient thing about her. I called my lawyer. His office isn't open on Saturdays, but I have his personal number, and he picked up on the third ring because that is the kind of lawyer you should have after 60 years of navigating the world. His name is not important. He is calm and methodical, and he has known me for 20 years. I told him what I had heard. He asked me 2 questions. Then he told me what my options were, and he told me which one he would recommend if it were his family. And I thanked him and hung up. Then I sat there for another 10 minutes and I thought about Ingrid. Ingrid at 7 pressing her face to the lobby glass. Ingrid at 11, the year the divorce started, making me tea in the mornings before I was awake because she had read somewhere that chamomile was calming. Ingrid at 34, on the phone 2 weeks ago, telling me she had never felt so certain about anything. I thought about that phone call for a long time. The word certain, how much she meant it. Then I went up to the 8th floor and I knocked on the door of the bridal suite. She opened it in her robe. Her hair was half done. She looked at my face and she said immediately, "Mom, what's wrong?" Not a question. She said it the way you say something when you already know the answer is going to change things. I told her. I did not soften it. I know some people would have. I have heard the argument that you protect someone by managing the delivery, by finding the right time, by waiting until things are calmer. But there was no calmer time. There was only this time. And I have learned in 64 years that the people who love you most are the ones who tell you the truth, when the truth is the only thing that will help you. I told her what I had heard, as close to word for word as I could manage. I told her about Derek's laugh. I told her what Paulette had said about the property. I told her what he had said about her, the most convenient thing about her. She sat down on the edge of the bed. She was very quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You're sure?" I said, "I am sure." She was quiet again for longer this time. I sat in the chair across from her, and I did not rush her. I have learned not to rush people through the things that have to be felt. She asked me if I had told anyone else. I said no. She asked me what she should do. I told her that was entirely her decision, and I meant it. I had said what I came to say. The rest belonged to her. She looked at her dress, which was hanging on the back of the bathroom door. It was ivory with a long train, and she had cried the first time she tried it on, and I had pretended not to notice because she asked me to. She looked at the dress for a very long time. Then she looked at me and said, "I need you to call the coordinator." I nodded. "And I need you to stay with me." I said I wasn't going anywhere. What happened in the next 90 minutes was not dramatic in the way you might imagine. There was no confrontation in the hallway. There was no scene in the lobby. Ingrid asked the wedding coordinator to inform the guests that the ceremony would be delayed, and then she asked me to be present while she made 2 phone calls, one to her best friend who was already in the building, and one to the officiant. I don't know what she said to Derek. That happened privately in a room down the hall, and she went alone and she came back alone, and she did not tell me the details, and I did not ask. What she told me was that she had asked him directly about the finances, about the joint accounts he had mentioned to Paulette, about the arrangement he had described, and that when she asked him, something in his face had shifted and he had not been able to hold the version of himself that he had been performing for 14 months. He had said it wasn't like that. She had said, "I know what you said," and she had walked out. The guests were told eventually that the wedding would not be taking place. The coordinator handled it with a professionalism that I will always be grateful for. There was murmuring, and there was confusion, and there were a handful of people who wanted explanations, and Ingrid's best friend, a woman of considerable nerve, managed most of it in the corridor while I stayed with my daughter. Paulette tried to reach me 3 times that afternoon. I did not answer. The following Monday, my lawyer sent a letter to Derek's address outlining the nature of what had been heard and observed. and advising him clearly that any attempt to pursue legal or financial claims connected to the engagement would be met with a full documented account of the conversation on the 9th floor. We did not hear from him again. The legal side of things took longer, which is always the way. My lawyer advised me to do something I should have done years earlier regardless, formalize the structure of my company and my assets so that they existed in a way that was clearly separate from any personal relationship. It wasn't complicated. It was the kind of thing you don't do because nothing has gone wrong yet, and then something goes wrong, and you do it immediately. I also changed the beneficiary arrangements on 2 of my accounts, not because I was angry, because clarity is not a punishment, it's just clarity. Ingrid went back to Ottawa. She took a week off work. She called me more than usual, which was already more than most. She did not talk about Derek very much. She talked about her patients, and about a documentary she'd watched about migratory birds, and about whether she should get a dog. I said she should get a dog. She got a dog, a very small and ridiculous one that she named after a character in a book I've never read, and he has been, by her account, enormously helpful. She asked me once, about 3 months later, how I had known. I mean, before, she said. Before that morning. How did you know something was off? I thought about it for a while before I answered. I said, I didn't know. I suspected. There's a difference. And I almost convinced myself that suspecting wasn't enough to say anything. She said, I'm glad you said something. I said, so am I. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said something I have thought about many times since. She said, I think the hardest part is that I did love him, or I loved who I thought he was, and those feel like the same thing when they're happening. I told her they were not the same thing, and that the one she had loved, the attentive, curious, kind person she had spent 14 months with, that person had not been real, which meant she had not wasted love. She had given real love to a fiction, and that was his loss entirely. She was quiet again. Then she said, That's a good way to think about it. I don't know if it's a good way. It's the only way I could find. What I know is this. There is a version of that morning where I walk past that door and say nothing, where I convince myself one more time that I have no proof, that she is an adult, that my job is to support and not to interfere. And Ingrid marries a man who is already calculating how to redirect what I have spent 30 years building, and she discovers it later, months later, years later, in a way that would be so much harder to untangle. Financially, legally. I walked past a lot of doors in my life when I should have stopped. I don't say that with guilt. I say it because it's true, and because by 64 you have accumulated enough hindsight to know the pattern when you see it. That morning I stopped. The Fairmont still looks like a castle. Ingrid and I have talked about going back, just the 2 of us, the way we went when she was small, not to undo anything, not to reclaim something. Just because it's a beautiful building and she has always loved it, and there is no reason that a place has to keep the feeling of one bad morning when 30 years of good ones came before it. We haven't gone yet, but we're going to. We've already decided. We're going in the spring, when the light on the river is still cold, but the worst of winter is over, and we're going to have dinner in the dining room, and I'm going to order something ridiculous off the wine list, and Ingrid is going to make fun of me for it, and it will be, in the precise sense of the word, exactly what I want. I've thought a lot about what makes a person capable of doing what Derek did. Not the mechanics of it, those are simple enough, but the internal arrangement that allows someone to look at a woman who loves them and see only a number attached to a mother's name. I don't think he was born that way. I think he was taught, and I think Paulette had been teaching him for a long time. That's not an excuse. It's just the thing I keep coming back to when I try to understand it without letting understanding become a way of softening it. What they did required a particular kind of dishonesty. Not the impulsive kind, not the desperate kind, but the deliberate, patient, planned kind, the kind that smiles at Thanksgiving dinner and asks thoughtful questions and follows up and does all of it in service of something that has nothing to do with the person sitting across the table. That takes a certain absence of conscience, and conscience, I've come to believe, is not automatic. It has to be practiced. It has to be chosen again and again in small moments that no one is watching. Derek had stopped practicing it somewhere along the way, or maybe he never started. Either way, the result was the same: a man who could call the most genuine thing about the woman he claimed to love her complete indifference to money, the most convenient thing about her. When I told Ingrid what I had heard, I wasn't sure she would believe me, not because she doubts me, but because the mind resists information that would require it to dismantle something it has spent 14 months building. That kind of resistance is not weakness, it's human. What she did in that bridal suite, in her robe with her hair half done, was something I think takes more than most people give it credit for. She thought clearly under the worst possible conditions. She asked me if I was sure. She sat with it. She made a decision that was going to cost her something real, and she made it anyway. That's not nothing. That's actually quite rare. I've been thinking about what I would say to her if she ever asked me what I hope she takes from all of this. Not about Derek specifically, but about the whole of it, what I would want her to carry forward. I think I would say, trust the quiet feeling, not paranoia. Paranoia is loud and self-referential. The quiet feeling is different. It's the one that doesn't insist on being heard. It just sits there, patiently, waiting for you to stop explaining it away. I spent 6 months explaining mine away, and I almost let that silence cost my daughter everything. I would also say, being clear-eyed about the people in your life is not cynicism. You can love people generously and still see them accurately. Those two things are not in conflict. Ingrid loved who she thought Derek was, and when the real version became undeniable, she didn't collapse. She stood up and walked out. That came from somewhere in her that had been built long before that hotel corridor. It came from years of choosing honestly, of not lying to herself about things because the truth was inconvenient, of living with her eyes open even when closing them would have been easier. That's the thing about the choices you make quietly over years that no one applauds. They are still building something. They built the person who could sit on the edge of a bed in Quebec City in October in a wedding dress she would never wear and say, "I know what you said," and walk out. I am proud of her for that. I am proud in the way that goes all the way down. We're going back to the Fairmont in the spring. We've already decided. And I think when we sit down in that dining room, neither of us will need to say very much. Some things are understood between people who have been through something together and come out the other side still facing the same direction. That's enough. That has always been enough.